Hey guys, welcome back to Nerd Crave. Today we're going to talk about something kind of interesting, and that is the business of collectibles. Collecting takes many forms, whether you collect video games or comic books or trading cards, sports memorabilia. There are so many things that people collect in this world. People literally collect anything from lunch boxes to old cereal boxes. It's absolutely crazy what people will collect. But there is a definite pattern to how the collectibles market works. There's a period in time when things are cheap, and there's a period in time where things become extremely expensive, and then they tend to taper off again. And we're going to discuss that today here in this video. If you're interested in starting a collection, whether it be video games or comic books or whatever it is that you're into, here's a few tips that can get you started. Stay tuned. Collecting is an old hobby. I've read references to boys collecting bottle caps and buttons at the turn of the century. It's only been relatively recently, though, in the last 50 or so years, that collecting pop culture items has become a booming business, instead of just a pastime of children and hoarders. Sure, even hundreds of years ago, wealthy people would collect art like paintings or sculptures or weapons or a variety of other things. But today, collecting is mostly synonymous with pop culture. People collect all kinds of things, from sports memorabilia like trading cards and signed jerseys to dead media like VHS tapes, Betamax, Laserdisc, or vinyl records. There are thousands of communities on social media platforms like Facebook for collectors of all kinds of things, from comic books and vintage toys to lunchboxes and even old cereal boxes. Video games are highly collectible, but that wasn't always the case. The video game collectible market is not new, but it is not mature yet in the way that something like sports cards or comic books are. VHS tapes have just begun to emerge as a collectible item in the last couple of years, and just recently we are seeing audio cassette tapes becoming collectible. Why, you ask? There are far better ways to consume the actual media these days, whether it's a digital comic book collection on an app like Comixology, or streaming music on Amazon or Spotify. Surely there are better ways to watch a movie than VHS in terms of picture quality. VHS is literally just about the worst format ever to exist, and yet... See, for most people, collecting is not about the actual item. Not really. It's about how that item makes you feel. Certain items, and it's literally different for every person depending on your personal experiences growing up, those items bring back feelings of nostalgia. Ah, nostalgia. That warm, fuzzy feeling you get when you remember the Christmas morning in 1987 when you found a Nintendo Entertainment System under the tree. Or wait, was it a Teddy Ruxpin? No? Maybe a My Pet Monster? No? A Barbie Dreamhouse? You get the picture. You remember how happy everyone was, sharing your joy at getting the toy of your dreams, and you remember all the great times with your friends and family enjoying the item, and bam! You're 35 years old, and you want to relive that magic. Collectibles go in very predictable cycles. They first lose popularity a few years after they're made. Huge numbers of them are broken, discarded, thrown away, donated, and then a few years pass, maybe a decade or so, and then the nostalgia kicks in. People in their mid-30s to mid-40s are the prime demographic for the collectibles market. They've moved away from childhood, gone through college, a few jobs, possibly gotten married and had a kid or two, and as those kids get to the age you were when you had those memories, it sparks the nostalgia in you, and you want to share those memories with your new kids so they can live on. People often feel driven to pass on their memories and the things they were passionate about to the next generation. It's human nature. However, over the years in between, those items that were so commonplace 20 or 30 years ago are now rare, or at least scarce. As I said before, when items are no longer in fashion, we throw them away, sell them in yard sales, or give them to the kid down the street. These items were never really intended to be collectibles. They were used, abused, and discarded. This is where values begin to be established. Value is based on two things: scarcity and popularity, or in other words, supply and demand. Something like a VHS tape just a few years ago actually had a negative value. You couldn't pay someone to take them off your hands. You literally had to take them to the dump to get rid of them. Even today, you can buy a fairly popular movie on VHS for less than $1 in most cases, and only the truly rare ones, the ones that were never printed in large volumes to begin with, really hold any value. However, as VHS tapes are increasingly being picked up by collectors at those prices, places like Value Village and Goodwill are already seeing the trend, and they've raised the prices in most stores from 99 cents to $2 or more, and they've started putting the ones that they think are more valuable in the glass showcases with outrageous prices. This is how it begins. If we look back to the early days of comic book collecting in the 60s, it was the same thing. 40-year-old men who had been kids in the 1940s growing up with the dawn of mega characters like Superman and Batman began to get nostalgic for those old comic books they had as kids. Comics were thought of like newspapers in the 40s and 50s. People read them, passed them around to friends and family, and then threw them out or used them for kindling in the fireplace. During World War II, there was a huge paper drive collecting paper products to be recycled for the war effort. This is why so few copies of comic books from the pre-war era exist. There are less than 100 copies of Superman #1 known to be in existence, with only less than 24 of those in any kind of decent condition. This is why you would have to pay up to $2 or $3 million for your very own copy. Scarcity. Scarcity is the biggest contributor to value on the high end of the spectrum, but on the lower end, popularity is the biggest contributor. It is very common for a 20-year-old video game that is popular to cost as much or more than a new video game today. Take, for example, 3 Nintendo games from the GameCube era: Smash Bros. Melee, Super Mario Sunshine, and Mario Kart Double Dash. 3 of the highest-selling games on the platform. There are literally more copies of these 3 games than half the rest of the GameCube library combined, and yet they consistently demand prices of $50, $60, or even $70 in some places, depending on condition, because they are popular. Not just popular to collectors, but in the case of both Smash Bros. And Mario Kart, they are still used in competitive play, and it is not uncommon for esports gamers and gaming lounges to have up to 4 copies of each game for network play. So even though the games are not at all rare, they hold their value. So when is the best time to start collecting your favorite thing? Well, first you have to ask yourself, why are you collecting at all? There are 2 major types of collectors, but the premise is the same for both. The first kind of collector collects items he loves for the passion of the hobby. He wants to own and reclaim a piece of his own past or a piece of history, a conversation piece, or maybe for preservation purposes because he is genuinely concerned that the items will disappear forever. The second kind of collector collects either for the thrill of the hunt or for monetary gain. Often the two are intertwined. There is a particular rush you get from finding a $200 item in the wild for $2 at a yard sale or a flea market, or even online on places like Craigslist or Facebook. While I'm not discussing resellers here, some collectors are fascinated with the value of the items more than the item itself or the nostalgia it brings, and will often buy rare or unusual items just because they are rare and unusual. Neither kind of collector is bad, neither is wrong. There's no wrong way to collect, but it can definitely be said that the first kind of collector comes first in the cycle. The guys that are passionate about the items start the collecting trend, and then the second kind of collector comes in and starts pushing up prices with demand. Unfortunately for the first kind of collector, if he or she did not get on the bandwagon at the right time, they can literally miss the boat. There is a sweet spot for buying and another sweet spot for selling in every collector's market, and there are several external factors that influence prices and demand over the life cycle of a collection. So let's get into those right now. So rule of thumb for getting started in a collection: buy when everyone else is selling. Watch the pattern for your item. Let's use the PlayStation 4 as an example. PS4 is the current gen system, however, the PS5 is on the horizon. Within the next year to 2 years, people are going to upgrade and start selling off or trading in the old PS4 stuff. This is when you want to start buying. Stores like GameStop and EB Games usually sell last-gen games for a couple of years after the launch of a new system, but at blowout prices. Games that were $60 at launch can be bought for $5 or less. Even really well thought of games can be found for $10 or $15. The mistake so many people make is selling when the market is low for that item. But their mistakes can be your success. Remember the adage, one man's trash is another man's treasure. It totally applies. This rule applies to every single item you might consider collectible. DVDs, movie posters, store standees, even the ridiculous stuff like Pogs from the 90s are becoming collectible again. As far as the external factors that affect prices, you have to keep on top of pop culture news to be able to predict the patterns. Take comics, for example. Every time a relatively unknown comic book character gets a TV show or appears in a movie, the key issues related to that character, like the first issue, become more collectible overnight. Heaven forbid an actor or actress or one of the artists from the comic book dies, then prices will skyrocket too. Shortly after Carrie Fisher passed away, I saw a signed, graded copy of Star Wars #1, which is normally about a $100 comic book without the signatures, sell for over $4,000. It's morbid, but it's the truth of collecting. So if you are a collector of passion and you want to own the things you are passionate about, you have to get in early. You can't wait for the market to mature. Some markets do come back down eventually. Atari 2600 games were super expensive back in the early 2000s, in the early days of eBay, but now they can be bought for next to nothing for the most part. Collecting does go in cycles, but unless you want to be really late to the party, you gotta try to be the early bird. Unless you just have stacks of cash and you don't care how you spend it anyway. Oh, and the last thing, the dirty words. Selling your collection. Nobody wants to think about that, but it is a reality for some. Whether you fall on hard times financially or you need to downsize your home or upsize your family, sometimes the collection has to go. All I can say is, take your time to really understand what you have in your collection. Research each item and learn how to assess condition. Try to sell to other collectors, as this is where you will get the most return. If at all possible, do not sell to a store or a reseller. Take the time to sell the items yourself. If you have to sell in a hurry, especially if you want to sell the whole collection as a lot, expect to take a huge loss. You'll probably only get 25 to 50% of what it's worth. Timing is everything. Patience is key. Alright guys, thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. I hope what I've had to say here has helped you out a little bit. Collecting can be a really murky affair. There's a lot of shady business deals, there's a lot of inflated prices, there's a lot of things that you just have to know. You have to be in the right place at the right time with the right knowledge. And I hope some of the things that I've shared here in this video will help to equip you so that you can find the things you're looking for at the right price at the right time. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. It helps me more than you know. Subscribe to the channel because we will be putting up at least 1 to 2 videos a week. And hit that little bell icon to get notified when I put up new videos. Thanks a lot, guys. Stay classy.